Welcome to Southwest Magazine. I'm Nathalie Sturgeon. Kids are back in school and there's plenty of things to know in the months ahead. Joining me today is Derek O'Brien, the superintendent for Anglophone South School District. Welcome to the show.
Hi Nathalie, how are you doing today?
Good, how are you?
Very well, thanks.
So the kids are back to school, it's a new school year. Talk to me about what you're hoping to achieve this year.
One of our focus areas this year will be around student achievement. We've spent a lot of time working in our schools to help students feel that they belong in their buildings, and we're going to continue initiatives that help do that, but we're really going to focus on the achievement piece, which is what schools are in place to do.
And that achievement piece, is that around certain types of curriculums or particular things that you're interested in seeing students achieve in?
We want all of our students to be successful in their programs, and I guess for us, really big important pieces are of course numeracy and literacy, and also around second language learning. And so those are our pieces that we'll definitely focus on in our schools to make sure that students really are achieving at their best potential that they can. We're also looking for opportunities in high school as we are continuing down the path for changing high school practices and changing what we're doing in our schools there. We're opening up new opportunities for high school students. We're trying to find more curricular areas and learning options for them that are not only relevant to the world, but relevant to their interests and how they learn. So we're really hoping to see high school students that they'll have greater success in the programs that we're creating for them.
How are their interests changing?
I think it's really, we're starting to learn more about how students learn, and we're starting to spend more time discovering what high school students are interested in. And there's such a variety, as you can imagine. Every student that comes into our school has different interest areas, so it's how we work with them to find out what does interest them and help them to guide that in terms of their learning and in the hopes of what they will want to do when they finish high school.
Speaking of second language learning, I wondered how enrollment was this year and sort of what you're expecting in that.
Our enrollment right now, and when we're looking at projections, we had 24,100 students approximately last year in our system, and we would anticipate to have around 24,500 and maybe a bit more as enrollment. We continue to have enrollment every day in our schools as newcomer families or as people moving to the province. We're registering their children as well. So we would anticipate to be around 24,500 by the end of September.
Is that a good number? Are there targets that you want to see that are maybe higher than that or lower than that?
We don't necessarily set a target for enrollment, because as students come in, if they're of school age, then they belong in our system, of course, and so we certainly welcome them into our schools regardless of the number. In certain areas of our district, we are struggling with the number of students in the building, because many schools are very full, and so we may need to adjust those populations in those buildings as best we can to make sure that we have learning spaces for them, because that is a real concern for our district, is that classrooms are filling up.
Yeah, that leads to my next question. Overcrowding is an issue not unique to your school district. I wonder what you can tell me about overcrowding in schools in Charlotte County and in the southwestern of New Brunswick.
Right. Southwestern New Brunswick, especially here in Charlotte County, we have less of a concern about the school being overfull, but we are starting to see that we're using schools to the potential for what they were built. So where we've been sitting in the years that we've gone through declining enrollment, we've had classroom spaces that aren't necessarily being used for classrooms, and we're able to free those up for other things, but we're starting to need those back for classroom spaces. So the impact here in Charlotte County really is around, we'll be starting to use the schools to their full potential now with the numbers that we have.
I know that Sussex is a little outside of Charlotte County, but how does the closure of that school, I guess, impact the school that those students will be going to?
At Norton Elementary. So right now we've had to temporarily close Norton Elementary, and we're waiting for the assessment of the building to come in and the action plan to be implemented. But we do intend to move forward, hopefully, with the Department of Education and the Department of Transportation and Infrastructure to make the necessary repairs to Norton. But it's looking like we'll be at least these first 4 months of the school year where we've moved those students to Sussex Elementary. So Norton Elementary has just over 100 700 students in the building, and we chose to move them to Sussex Elementary because we could accommodate them in that school without splitting them up, splitting their homeroom classes up the way they were expecting to be together this fall. So it took us, I believe, 6 classroom spaces at Sussex Elementary. We've had to make some adjustments to some other learning spaces in the building temporarily. For example, we were using the library space for some small individual student spaces and for some office spaces for some visiting professionals. So Sussex Elementary right now is it's tight, but it is a school that was built for approximately 700 students, and this will bring them up to probably around 450 students. So we certainly can accommodate them in that building, but we're operating very much like 2 schools within one building, because we want to make sure that the families of Norton, that those families are staying together and that they can still sort of believe that they're still in their school environment as much as possible, knowing they're in another building. So it will be very tight, but at the same time, the school administrators have done a fantastic job from both schools, welcoming in their staff as well as welcoming in the 2 school communities that will be cohabitating there for the first few months of the school year.
You touched on this a little bit, but how has growth impacted our education system? The population growth that we're seeing in New Brunswick and in particular Charlotte County?
Right. It certainly has changed a bit, because most of my career we've been in a situation of declining enrollment, and so we're in situations where we've had lots of staff to deal with the students that we have, and now we're in a situation and that's added to the challenges that we've faced and every other organization has faced in hiring staff of all sorts. And so that has had an impact on us, because we are constantly recruiting teachers and educational assistants into our system, because with the increased enrollment, we have to add more teaching staff in particular. But that has an impact all the way through our system, because it means additional bus drivers, additional school buses, it means additional support staff for those schools. So that has continued to be a pressure point for us. For a number of years, I would have had school staffing pretty much wrapped up early in July, but it's something, the school staffing piece for us goes on throughout the entire year now. So we're constantly in a recruitment of staff to support work in the schools.
I know staff mentioned to me that there are no teacher vacancies in Charlotte County currently, but I'm wondering if you have any other vacancies in the system that are sort of maybe causing you challenges into the school year.
There certainly are. So at the end of last week, we had approximately 3 teacher vacancies throughout the entire district that were unfilled, and I felt very, very good about that, because in perspective to other years, we're in a much better place. And I anticipate, when working with our Human Resources Department and our directors of schools, those positions will be filled very soon. We of course have them temporarily filled since school is open, but we'll cross the T's and dot the I's on those positions within a few days. What makes us always nervous is there are always things that come up in staffing, because you have people who apply for leaves of absences for one reason or another, and although we have a large list of casual staff who are on the supply teacher list, they're not necessarily certified. All of them aren't necessarily certified teachers, and so they're not looking for full-time teacher work. So we're constantly recruiting in that way. We also know that we have a few positions at the district level that we have not filled yet, because we want to make sure that when we do fill them, they'll obviously pull from school staff. So we'll want to make sure we're able to fill those positions in the schools before we pull people into district positions. So that's still weighing on our minds, and we're still working through that.
Turning a little bit to policies, this year will be the first year the cell phone policy is in effect. I wondered how you thought students would receive that policy.
We've been very fortunate in Anglophone South, because prior to the provincial policy that was released last year, most of our middle schools and high schools had policies around cell phone use and device use in schools. That did vary because in some schools it was, a very strong ban on one end, and others who were letting students use them. So we do depend on the expertise of our teachers, because there are very good pedagogical reasons and learning reasons why students would be needing devices in the classroom, and we want teachers to have that flexibility to be able to decide this is a useful tool for us right now, so we should use them. But at the same time, we know that it causes great distractions in school for our learners, so we want to restrict that as much as possible. So for our schools, they would have had policies in place, and the provincial policy will really help to support the work that they're doing. And I have noticed in social media from our schools over the last few weeks that many of them are putting that information out to parents now, so that families are very aware of what the expectation is around the use of devices. We also know, in addition to the distractions that they can cause, there's the distraction around behavior, because for a lot of students, their social life is happening on their phones out there beyond school hours, but oftentimes that comes into the school with them, and so administrators and school staff are dealing with those things that happen in their social media lives and in the cell phone life of these young people, but they're dealing with it in schools because that's where it tends to come up when students gather.
And there are exceptions to this rule for certain individuals. If you could walk me through those.
Absolutely. So some students we know, particularly students with diabetes is a good example, because a lot of them would use their device to monitor their health throughout the day. And so for those situations, we definitely understand that, and we have a practice in place whereby the Education Support Services team would have the information from families and also from their medical practitioners, and would say, this is what the student would be doing and needing to do with their cell phone throughout the day, and that obviously, would be something that we work with families on all the time.
Has it been more challenging, I guess, to teach with technology? I know in our business, we're working to dispel misinformation, but you mentioned social media. Is it harder to teach with technology kind of at our fingertips all the time?
I always liken that for families and especially adults, because I say, it sounds simple to an adult who doesn't have the experience of a classroom full of children or students and young people. And they'll say, well, they just need to put their cell phones away. And I will often say, now imagine in a room full of adults if we asked them all to put their cell phones away, and it would be almost a nightmare for those adults in the room and for the person trying to control that. So that's what we're doing in school. But I think we can all admit, when we attend social functions with other adults, if you look around the room, there probably are as many people on their cell phones in that social atmosphere as there would be people without them. So it's a piece that we're dealing with in society today, but I think we certainly notice it as a distraction and as an inappropriate distraction for students when they're trying to learn.
And so, as you head into the school year, what do you think will be some of the bigger challenges you're going to face this year?
We will have ongoing concerns around staffing, because we know that things happen during the year and in people's lives, and we will need to be replacing people from time to time, and so that will be an ongoing concern for us. And I think around students, we're always trying to do the very best we can to support all of our learners in the system, but there are always new challenges coming up every day. I'm confident because I have a great team around me. We have a wonderful team of school administrators out there with, I know, great school staffs, so I'm confident that we can work through whatever problems may come up for us throughout the year.
Do you have any concerns, I guess, about respiratory illnesses and that sort of thing? We're heading into the fall, and I know that you have experience dealing with COVID-19, so I'm just wondering what your concern level is about respiratory illnesses heading into the fall.
We would always encourage schools and the families coming into our buildings to practice the best health safety practices that they can as they're coming in each day. But we know we're also an environment where things are going to be shared around because there are students in close proximity to one another. But we always try to do the very best we can. Our facilities staff are always working very hard to keep the building as clean as they possibly can. We're very glad to have some upgrades to a lot of our ventilation systems in our schools to help with that. And we, of course, work very closely with public health. And so when we get advice or when we have suggestions from public health, we do our very best to implement those as quickly and as diligently as possible to make sure that we have great health practices for schools. But the flu season does certainly come around each year, and we're always trying to mitigate that as best we can. We have policies in place to help us track the numbers of those things taking place as best we can, and when we need to react, we have a plan in place.
And on 713, if I could just ask, this will be the first full year that the policy is in effect, if I'm not mistaken. How do you think queer students are feeling heading into this year?
We have always been working as hard as we can in our school district and all of our schools to help every student, regardless of gender, regardless of race or their differences or preferences for whatever it is they're choosing, to help them find a place to belong in our schools. And we're going to continue to work hard doing that for sure.
And I would like to touch quickly on early dismissal. I know that that's a big change, both for parents and for students. Walk me through what the change actually is.
So what it means is that our kindergarten to grade 2 students used to be dismissed approximately 1 hour earlier than all of our other students in the system. And that's a very historical piece, because when kindergarten became part of the public school system in New Brunswick, it was determined that we couldn't fit all of those students on school buses to get them home at the same time, so we needed to have 2 separate bus runs for students. And so that's where we ended up, where those students were having a shorter school day than everyone else. And so this year, it was part of the collective agreement with the Teachers Federation back in the fall that kindergarten to grade 2 hours of instruction would increase to match those of the others. And so really it's bringing us in line with other jurisdictions, because in other jurisdictions, kindergarten to grade 2 students would have more hours of instruction. So we've moved to that. We spent a lot of time on that in the winter and spring of the year. Our principals, of course, were preparing the schools for it. Teachers were preparing in terms of the schedules. We were looking at some curriculum changes from the department in order to support what kindergarten to grade 2 students would be doing during that extra time at school. And it also gave us time to start planning our bus runs and adjusting school schedules as they had to be. There hasn't been a huge impact on our schools here in Anglophone South. We've been able to adjust the times. In some schools it means maybe a few minutes later start or a few minutes later at the end of the day, but it hasn't been a huge adjustment. We do have our bus runs are moving ahead. We expect that we'll be able to meet all of those targeted times to get students picked up and delivered back at home. So that's been one of the biggest pieces. We are excited about the opportunity for students, because those students in kindergarten to grade 2, they're going to have more time now in the school day, and it gives them more opportunity to practice the skills that they're learning at school. It gives teachers more time to do some of the more learning support activities that can be involved, and also more opportunity for students to consolidate their learning, where they get that time to breathe before they move on to the next thing, and to actually start connecting the dots between all of the curriculum that they're learning.
Do you hope to gain any feedback, sort of maybe after the first 3 or 4 months, from parents and from students about that late dismissal?
We will work closely with the schools on that, and we meet with our principals and vice principals regularly throughout the year, and so we'll gather feedback from those school administrators to see, and we probably will do some work to try and engage families. Most of the feedback so far has been very positive from families, that they understand the reason why we have to move forward in this direction, and I think they're looking forward to see how it ends up at the end of the school year.
So things are still quite warm. I know last year school was cut short by I think a day. How are you preparing, I guess, as we go into the winter, it's not such a big deal, but in the summer next year, for those hot days where students are finding it very warm in the classroom, how are you preparing for that?
Our ventilation systems in our schools are doing a great job to keep the level of humidity down in the buildings, as well as to help keep some air circulating in the buildings, which makes a huge difference. In Anglophone South, that would be such a diverse look, because across our district, I mean, our schools in Campobello Island would not experience the same level of heat and humidity as our schools in let's say, Milledgeville part of St. John, or maybe out in the valley in KV. So it is very different, because you have, even in uptown St. John, you always have that nice harbor breeze that seems to come in. So it does have less. We would send out information to schools, especially in June when the days seem to be warmer, and encourage them to do things like, some frequent breaks for students, maybe less outdoor activity when it is really hot and humid outside. We would always encourage our students and staff to be hydrating. I mean, there's always access to water in the buildings, and we would encourage them to do that. But other practices like turning off the fluorescent lights in the classroom to help maintain that. So we have made some practices to help deal with the climate change that we're facing here.
And I mean, last year there was kind of some criticism from parents that maybe the decision should have come a little bit earlier. Are you bracing for maybe having to end the school year a little bit earlier, given the climate change and the heat that we're experiencing here in New Brunswick?
I wouldn't anticipate us needing to change the calendar at this point. I mean, that may be in some bigger discussions well above me, because it is the Minister of Education and Early Childhood Development who sets the calendar. But we are obligated to 195 days, and we have to fit those into the calendar. And maybe that means we have to adjust the school days in certain ways, or that we just maybe need to take a look at some of the practices that we're doing every single day when those days are really warm.
And we talked about teacher shortages and educational staff shortages, but in that bubble is bus drivers. And I wanted to touch base with you on where you are in staffing in terms of bus drivers and how you see that going this year.
We hope to be where we need to be in terms of our staffing level of bus drivers. We had 2 weeks ago, we had a new cohort of, I think it was between 12 or 15 drivers who were going through the training and the testing right at our office in St. John. And so that will be, 12 new additional bodies, hopefully, if all of their testing goes well, that will have them ready to be moving into the next stage, which will be to actually working with coach trainers that we have as drivers. And that will help with our busing system for sure.
Any final thoughts that you want to add about the school year?
I would always encourage, especially in these first few days of school, because it is quite a change in our communities after the summer months, when all of a sudden 235 school buses in Anglophone South are now out on the roads. They cover around 33,000 kilometers in road travel. And so I would encourage people to be patient, especially when they're out driving. We will have high school students who are driving themselves to school. We will have a lot more families who are dropping their children off at schools. So the streets are going to be busier, and I would always encourage people to be cautious and also to be much more patient, especially in the first few days as people are getting used to their routines. And it's also, from my days as being a school principal, parents would sometimes say, well, we're going to drive them for the first few days. And I would encourage them, if they were bus students or if they were walking students, to begin their routine as early as they can. What is the routine going to be? Because that is when people are being most cautious. I mean, it's out there now. People know that the day after Labor Day is the first day of school, and people are much more aware. And so start those routines as early as you can, so that we know students are going to be at the right place at the right time. I always want to encourage parents as well, because we are working hard in our schools to make sure students have opportunities and feel like they belong. We also know that achievement is one of our big priorities. But we have to have students in school. And although I understand that there are illnesses and other things that need to keep students from school, I think it's really important that families make sure when students can be in school that they are, for the best opportunities to connect in the building and for the best opportunities to learn. At the same time, there are always issues that happen. I mean, we are a human endeavor, and interactions with people sometimes get strained, but I would encourage families to keep those avenues of communication open with their school. If there are issues that arise, to have those conversations with the school staff and with the school administration and help work through those, because we're all here trying to do our very best for our students in our system.
Thanks for joining us today.
Great, thank you.
My guest today was Derek O'Brien, Superintendent for Anglophone South School District. I'm Nathalie Sturgeon, and thanks for watching Southwest Magazine.
Southwest Magazine is a news and public affairs production of CHCO Television.